Welcome. Take a moment. Let your shoulders drop. If you're here right now, there's a good chance something small followed you longer than it should have. A comment at work, a look that felt off, a situation you handled on the outside but kept replaying on the inside. You didn't lose control. You stayed quiet. You did what you had to do. And still, hours later, it's there. That tightness, that sense of being unsettled for no clear reason. At some point, usually when the house gets quiet, a harder question slips in. Why does this keep getting to me when I know better? It's not a lack of strength. It's not poor discipline. It's not that you're broken. There's a moment most people never learn to see. A narrow space where pressure turns into reaction, where dignity is either spent or quietly preserved. The Stoics built their lives around that space, not to become numb, not to dominate anyone, but to move through life without carrying unnecessary weight. In the next moments, we'll step into that space together and look at how calm becomes a choice, not by force, but by understanding what's actually in your control. That space is where most of the damage is done. Not in the argument, not in the words that were said, but in what stays behind afterward. The invisible fire doesn't announce itself. It doesn't slam doors or raise voices. It sits quietly in the chest while you drive home. It shows up when you're brushing your teeth, replaying a moment that already ended. It's there when you nod along at dinner, but your mind is somewhere else, still tight, still alert. From the outside, everything looks fine. You handled it. You kept it together. You did what an adult is supposed to do. But inside, something is still burning. This is how it usually starts. A meeting runs long. Someone dismisses your idea with a half smile. No insult, nothing obvious, just enough to make you feel smaller than you were a minute ago. You don't react. You shouldn't. You tell yourself it's not worth it. And that's when the fire moves inward. Later that night, the room is quiet. Your phone is face down. The day is technically over, but your jaw is still tight. Your breathing hasn't fully settled. You catch yourself replaying the scene. What you could have said, what you should have said, what it meant about how you're seen. That's the invisible fire. And most people never name it. They call it stress. They call it being tired. They call it having a lot on their plate. But it's something more specific than that. It's the tension of carrying an unresolved judgment, a verdict you issued without realizing it. Something inside you decided, that shouldn't have happened. That crossed a line. That made me look weak. And once that judgment is in place, the body stays on guard. The nervous system doesn't relax. It thinks there's still a threat to deal with. This is where Stoicism begins, not with control, but with clarity. The Stoics noticed something most people miss. They saw that events don't ignite us on their own. What burns is the meaning we attach to them. Two people can hear the same comment. One shrugs it off and forgets it by lunch. The other carries it for days. The difference isn't toughness. It isn't intelligence. It isn't emotional depth. It's judgment. Somewhere between what happened and how you felt a thought slipped in. Often quiet, often automatic. A thought like I'm being disrespected. This says something about my worth. I can't let this stand. The moment that thought lands, the fire has fuel. And here's the part that matters. That thought feels like a fact. It doesn't arrive labeled as an opinion. It feels true in the body before it ever reaches language. That's why telling yourself to calm down doesn't work. You're trying to soothe the fire while still feeding it. The Stoics didn't start by asking how to suppress anger. They asked a quieter question. What am I telling myself right now? Not out loud, not dramatically, just honestly. Am I assuming intent? Am I measuring my value against someone else's behavior? Am I demanding the world behave in a way it never promised to? Most of the time, the answer is uncomfortable, because the invisible fire isn't protecting you from danger. It's protecting an image, an idea of how things are supposed to go, an idea of how you're supposed to be treated. And when that image is threatened even slightly, the body reacts as if something essential is at risk. This is why the fire lingers even after you walk away. The situation ended, but the judgment stayed open. The Stoics believed that leaving judgments unexamined was the real source of exhaustion. Not the world, not other people, but the constant inner resistance to reality as it is. That resistance has a cost. It tightens your chest. It shortens your patience. It follows you into places where it doesn't belong. Over time, it becomes familiar. So familiar that you stop noticing it as tension and start calling it personality. This is just how I am. I've always been this way. I get irritated easily. But habits feel natural once you've carried them long enough. The invisible fire isn't a flaw, it's a pattern. And patterns can be seen. Once you start noticing how quickly a moment turns into a judgment, and how that judgment turns into tension, something shifts. Not all at once, not dramatically, but the fire loses a little oxygen because awareness interrupts the automatic loop. It creates the first crack in what felt solid. And that crack is where real change begins. Once you start noticing the fire, a harder question shows up. Not about what happened, but about what you were guarding when it happened. Because the truth is, you're not protecting your peace in those moments. You're protecting something far more fragile. Picture it clearly. You're standing there, hands steady, face neutral. Someone speaks past you, cuts you off, dismisses your effort with a shrug. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth a scene. But inside, something tightens immediately. That tightening isn't anger yet. It's defense. It's the instinct to brace, to hold ground, to not be reduced. As if something essential might slip away if you don't stay alert. Most people assume they're protecting their feelings. They're not. They're protecting their image, the image of being competent, of being respected, of being the kind of person who doesn't get overlooked or talked down to. That image matters more than we like to admit, especially in a culture that quietly teaches you to stand on your own, to earn your place, to not be invisible. So, when something threatens that image, even subtly, the body reacts before the mind can explain it. Your shoulders rise, your breath shortens, your attention narrows. This is the moment most people miss. They think the problem is the other person, or the situation, or the timing. But what's really happening is this: an idea you're carrying about who you are just felt challenged, and the fire flares to protect it. The Stoics were very clear about this. They didn't believe anger was about events. They believed it was about attachment. Attachment to reputation, attachment to control, attachment to how things are supposed to go. Epictetus once pointed out that no one can insult you unless you agree with the insult. Not because words aren't sharp, but because their power depends on your judgment. That doesn't mean the comment was kind. It doesn't mean it was fair. It means something inside you decided this matters more than it should. And the moment you make that decision, you hand the situation leverage over your inner state. This is where Stoicism goes deeper than simple self-control. It asks you to look at what you're defending so fiercely. Is it your character, or is it your ego? Character doesn't need constant protection. It's proven by how you act when no one is clapping, by how steady you remain when things don't go your way. Ego, on the other hand, is always on edge, always scanning for threats, always measuring itself against others. That's why the fire feels so urgent. Ego believes silence equals loss, that if you don't react, you've been diminished. But notice something important. The more you rush to protect that image, the more power you give to whatever challenged it. A single remark turns into an evening of tension. A momentary slight becomes a story you carry home. And all the while, the thing you're protecting never actually gets safer. The Stoics didn't tell people to stop caring about respect. They told them to place it in the right location. Real dignity. They believed lives in your choices, not in other people's opinions, not in how smoothly the world treats you. When you anchor your sense of worth there in what you control, the need to flare up weakens. You start to feel the difference. The same comment lands. The same situation unfolds. But instead of tightening immediately, there's a brief pause. A quiet realization. This doesn't get to decide who I am. That doesn't mean you approve. It doesn't mean you swallow everything. It means you don't confuse your value with someone else's behavior. This is the shift from guarding an image to standing in character, from reacting to protect pride to responding from principle. And once you see that distinction, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how often the fire rises, not because something is truly at stake, but because an old habit whispers, "Don't let this slide." The Stoic answer isn't to harden yourself. It's to ask a better question. What am I really protecting right now? If the answer is ego, you can let it burn out. If the answer is character, you already know how to act. That understanding doesn't end conflict, but it changes your relationship with it. The fire still appears, but it no longer runs the house. And that's where real strength begins. Once you see that the fire is guarding an image, not your character, something loosens. The grip isn't as tight. The moment feels different. This is where the Stoic turn begins. Not with force, not with shutting anything down, but with a quiet shift in where you place your attention. Picture a familiar scene. You're walking out of a building after a long day. The parking lot is half empty. The air is cooling down. Your phone buzzes with a message that doesn't sit right. A few words, a tone you can't quite read, enough to stir that old reaction. Normally, your mind would sprint ahead, interpret, assume, build a case, but this time, you don't follow it. You notice your breathing first, a little shallow, your shoulders slightly raised. You don't argue with it. You don't tell yourself to calm down. You just register it the way you would notice the weather. This is the Stoic move most people never learn. You stop arguing with the moment and start observing your response to it. The Stoics believed that life hits everyone the same way. Delays, disrespect, loss, unfairness. What separates people isn't exposure, it's interpretation. Between what happens and what you feel, there is a judgment forming, usually fast, usually unconscious. This is bad. This shouldn't be happening. This means something about me. The Stoic turn is choosing to look directly at that judgment instead of letting it run the show. Not to deny it, but to test it. Is this actually within my control? Is my character at risk here, or just my pride? Does this require action, or just clarity? These questions don't sound dramatic. That's the point. They slow the moment down. Most people try to regain control by reacting, by speaking louder, by proving a point, by tightening their grip on the situation. Stoicism does the opposite. It loosens the grip on what was never yours to control. The Stoics divided life into two simple categories: what belongs to you and what doesn't. Your thoughts, your choices, your actions. Those are yours. Other people's moods, their opinions, their timing, their awareness, those aren't. When you forget that distinction, the fire burns hot because you're trying to manage a world that doesn't take orders. When you remember it, something settles. The situation doesn't change, but your position inside it does. This isn't resignation, it's precision. Marcus Aurelius wrote reminders to himself, not instructions for others. He wasn't trying to control the empire. He was trying to govern his own mind inside it. That's the heart of the Stoic turn. Power doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from choosing where not to push at all. Think about how much energy goes into replaying moments you can't change. The conversations that already ended, the reactions you wish you'd had, all of that energy is spent outside your sphere of control. The Stoics saw that as a leak, a slow drain on clarity and strength. So they trained themselves to come back to what's in front of them. The next right action, the tone they choose, the restraint they practice, not because they were passive, but because they were deliberate. The Stoic turn doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care about the right things. You care about acting with fairness instead of winning, about steadiness instead of dominance, about self-respect instead of applause. And when you make that shift, something subtle happens. The fire still appears, but it doesn't own the room. You can feel irritation without becoming it. You can notice the urge to react without obeying it. There's space now, not a gap filled with tension, but a clean pause. In that pause, you're no longer trapped between impulse and regret. You're choosing. This is the turning point. From reaction to response. From defending an image to standing in principle. It doesn't make life quiet overnight, but it makes it workable. And once you experience that difference even briefly, you start to recognize it as strength. Not loud, not showy, just steady. That's the Stoic turn. And everything that follows is built on it. Once that shift happens, once you stop chasing control and start choosing it, something very small becomes very important. A pause. Not the kind that looks dramatic, not silence meant to punish or prove a point. Just a brief moment where nothing happens. Most people never notice it because it's uncomfortable. The pause feels like standing in the doorway during a storm. You can still feel the wind. You can still hear the noise. But you haven't stepped into it yet. This is the decisive moment. Picture it clearly. You're in the middle of a conversation. Someone says something sharp, not loud, not cruel, just sharp enough to land. Your body reacts before you do. Chest tightens, heat rises, a sentence forms in your mouth, ready to fire. This is where life usually takes over. Words come out fast, tone hardens. Later, you replay it and think, that wasn't who I wanted to be. But right before that happens, there is a narrow space. A fraction of a second most people blow past. The Stoics trained themselves to live inside that space. They understood that emotions don't need to be eliminated. They need to be delayed, because delay changes everything. In that pause, the body is still activated. The feeling is still there. But the mind hasn't committed yet. That's the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is automatic. Response is chosen. The Stoics believed that freedom lives in that choice, not in perfect calm, not in flawless self-control, but in the ability to not be rushed by your first impulse. Think about how often regret comes from speed. A text sent too fast, a comment made in the heat of the moment, a decision rushed because silence felt unbearable. The pause interrupts that pattern. It gives the nervous system just enough time to settle. Not completely, just enough. Enough to ask a better question. Not, how do I win this? But what response keeps my character intact? That question changes the direction of the moment. The Stoics didn't see the pause as weakness. They saw it as leverage. While others were being pulled by the situation, they were standing still. Marcus Aurelius described this kind of restraint as strength without noise. Not retreat, not submission, but composure under pressure. You can feel it when you practice it. Your jaw unclenches slightly. Your breath deepens by a fraction. The urgency softens. Nothing outside has changed, but you're no longer trapped inside the surge. This is where dignity is either preserved or spent. and it doesn't take long. A single breath, a moment of stillness, one decision not to speak yet. That's enough. The pause doesn't mean you never speak up. It means you choose when and how. Sometimes the right move is to say something clear, direct, calm. Other times, the stronger move is to say nothing at all and let the moment pass without feeding it. The pause gives you access to both options. Without it, you only have one. Most people live as if urgency equals importance, as if every feeling requires immediate expression. Stoicism challenges that assumption. It teaches that timing is part of wisdom. That restraint isn't suppression, it's intention. Think about a moment at home, a long day. Someone you care about snaps at you, not because of you, but because they're carrying their own weight. You feel the reflex to snap back, to defend, to correct. The pause gives you another option. You notice the tension. You don't feed it. You let it settle. And when you speak, if you speak at all, it comes from clarity, not heat. That one pause can change the entire direction of an evening. This is why the Stoics treated the pause as a discipline, something to be practiced long before it was needed. Because under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your level of training. The pause is that training. It's not about becoming passive. It's about becoming precise. Choosing the right action instead of the fastest one. And the more you practice it, the more familiar it becomes. At first, it feels unnatural, like holding back a reflex. But over time, it feels like control. Quiet, steady, reliable. The pause doesn't make you less engaged with life. It makes you harder to pull off center. And in a world that constantly tries to rush your reactions, that kind of steadiness is rare. It's also learnable. The pause is where the Stoic path becomes real, not as an idea, but as a lived skill. And once you know where it is, once you've felt it, even once you start to recognize it everywhere, waiting for you. Once you learn where the pause lives, the next question becomes unavoidable. How do you make it reliable? Because calm doesn't show up on demand. Not when you're tired, not when you're under pressure, not when something touches an old nerve. Calm has to be trained. Most people wait for the moment of conflict to try to be steady. That's like stepping into a weight room for the first time and reaching straight for the heaviest bar. It doesn't work. And when it fails, they assume something is wrong with them. Nothing is wrong. They're just untrained. Think about how strength is built in the body, not with one heroic effort, but with small, repeated movements done when no one is watching. The Stoics understood calm the same way. They didn't expect themselves to suddenly become unshakable in chaos. They practiced steadiness in ordinary moments, so it would be there when things got loud. You can see it in the way they lived. Quiet mornings, simple routines, regular reflection. Not because life was easy, but because life was hard. Calm wasn't a personality trait to them. It was a discipline. Picture a regular day. Nothing dramatic, just errands, emails, conversations, noise. You're standing in line. Someone sighs loudly behind you. You feel the familiar tightening. That's a rep. You notice it. You don't react. You let it pass. Later, a meeting runs over. Plans shift. Your schedule slips. Another rep. At home, someone you love is short with you. You feel the urge to snap back. Another rep. These moments don't look important. That's why most people waste them. The Stoics didn't. They treated each one as training, a chance to practice restraint without consequences, a chance to strengthen the habit of choosing response over impulse. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself at the end of the day, not to shame himself, not to boast, to notice. What pulled at me today? Where did I lose my footing? Where did I hold it? That kind of reflection sharpens awareness. It teaches you your patterns. And once you see a pattern, you can work with it. Training. Calm doesn't require long retreats or perfect conditions. It happens in short, deliberate moments. A slower breath before you speak. Letting a comment pass without answering it. Choosing to listen instead of interrupting. These are not small acts. They're quiet exercises in self-command. The Stoics believed that you become what you repeatedly practice, not what you intend, not what you admire, what you practice. If you practice, reaction becomes automatic. If you practice restraint becomes familiar. Over time, something shifts. You don't feel calm because nothing bothers you. You feel calm because you've trained your mind not to treat every disturbance as an emergency. Your nervous system learns a new default. And when real pressure arrives, you don't scramble. You move from muscle memory. This is why Stoicism was built for ordinary life, for work days, for family tension, for responsibility. It was never meant to remove you from the world. It was meant to prepare you for it. Calm trained this way doesn't make you passive. It makes you dependable. People can feel it, not because you announce it, but because you don't add fuel to every spark. You become someone others don't have to tiptoe around, someone whose presence steadies a room. That kind of calm isn't flashy. It doesn't need to be. It's earned. one quiet choice at a time. And the more you train it, the more it trains you. Until one day, you realize something simple and surprising. The moments that used to throw you off no longer have the same grip. Not because life got easier, but because you got steadier. As you grow steadier, another tension quietly appears. If I let this go, am I letting myself be walked over? That question lives deep, especially in a culture that teaches you to stand your ground, to defend your name, to never look weak. So instead of releasing what doesn't serve us, we grip it tighter. We hold on to irritation, like proof that we still care, that we still have standards, that we're not invisible. But holding on has a cost. You feel it at the end of the day. The way your body stays tense, even when nothing is happening. The way your mind keeps circling a moment that's already gone. Letting go isn't easy because it feels like surrender. The Stoics saw it differently. To them, letting go wasn't about giving up ground. It was about choosing what deserved their energy. Picture a situation that happens more often than anyone admits. You're driving. Traffic slows to a crawl. Someone cuts in at the last second. Your hands tighten on the wheel. Your jaw locks. A rush of heat rises. You could chase that feeling. Let it sour the next half hour. Carry it into wherever you're headed. Or you could notice something simple. That moment already happened. Nothing you do now changes it. The Stoic move isn't to pretend it didn't matter. It's to recognize that your peace matters more. Letting go, in this sense, isn't passive, it's selective. The Stoics taught that most suffering comes from demanding control over things that don't belong to us. Other people's behavior, timing, outcomes. When you cling to those, you stay locked in resistance. When you release them, you free up strength for what's still yours. Your response, your tone, your next step. This is where many people get it wrong. They think letting go means silence forever, means swallowing every slight, means shrinking. It doesn't. Letting go means you don't confuse reaction with self-respect. There are moments when speaking up matters, when setting a boundary is necessary, when action is required. But those moments are clearer when you're not acting from heat. The Stoics believed that calm action carries more weight than emotional reaction. Not because it looks impressive, but because it's accurate. Think about a disagreement at home. Someone says something careless. You feel the familiar urge to correct, to push back. You pause. You breathe. You ask yourself, is this worth carrying into tomorrow? Sometimes the answer is yes. And when it is, you address it directly, without edge. Other times, the answer is no. and you let it pass, not because you're afraid, but because you know it doesn't define you. That's the difference. Letting go doesn't erase you. It clarifies you. The Stoics didn't measure strength by how much someone could endure. They measured it by how well someone could choose. Choose what to carry. Choose what to drop. Every resentment you hold is weight. Every imagined slight you replay adds more. Over time, the load changes how you move, how you speak, how quickly you tire. Letting go lightens that load. Not all at once. Not dramatically. One moment at a time. You feel the urge to grip. You notice it. You loosen your hold, and you keep walking. This kind of release doesn't make you indifferent. It makes you efficient. Your energy stops leaking into places it was never meant to go. You save it for work that matters, for people you care about, for decisions that actually shape your life. The Stoic path isn't about being untouched by the world. It's about not being owned by it. Letting go without losing yourself means standing firm where it counts and staying flexible everywhere else. That balance doesn't announce itself, but once you feel it, you understand why the Stoics called it freedom. Once you stop gripping, every slight conflict begins to look different. It no longer feels like a threat to your worth. It feels like an invitation, not an easy one, not a comfortable one, but a useful one. Most people treat conflict as something to win or avoid. They brace, they argue, they rehearse what they'll say if it happens again. The Stoics took another view. They treated conflict as practice. Picture a moment that doesn't look important from the outside. You're waiting your turn to speak. Someone cuts in, keeps talking, acts as if you're not there. Your first impulse is sharp. A surge of heat. A quick story forms in your head about respect and fairness. This is usually where things escalate. But instead of leaning forward, you lean inward. You notice the urge. You don't obey it. That moment becomes a rep, not a test of patience. A test of mastery. The Stoics believed life constantly puts weight on you, not to crush you, but to strengthen you. Every interruption, every misunderstanding, every unfair remark, each one asks the same question: who's in control here? Not of the other person, of you. When conflict shows up, the instinct is to protect your pride, to assert dominance, to make sure the other person knows where you stand. But pride is loud, and it burns out fast. The Stoics trained something quieter. They trained the ability to stay centered while pressure is applied. That doesn't mean backing down. It means choosing your ground. Think about a disagreement at work. A project goes sideways. Someone points a finger in a meeting. You feel the pull to defend yourself immediately, to correct the record, to prove your competence. You pause. You listen. You speak only when your words add clarity, not fuel. Later, the conversation shifts, not because you overpowered anyone, but because you didn't destabilize yourself. That's practice, not perfection. Practice. The Stoics didn't believe character was built in isolation. They believed it was forged in contact. That's why they didn't wish for easier lives. They wished for stronger minds. Conflict exposes your weak spots, the places where ego still runs ahead of judgment, the places where you still confuse being right with being at peace. And that exposure is valuable. It shows you exactly what needs work. If a raised voice rattles you, that's information. If being ignored sets you off, that's information. If criticism lingers for days, that's information. The Stoic doesn't judge himself for that. He studies it. What did that moment touch? What belief flared up? What did I rush to protect? Each answer sharpens awareness, and awareness changes behavior. Over time, something subtle happens. You start entering situations differently, not guarded, not tense, prepared. You expect friction. You expect misunderstanding. You expect human behavior. So when it arrives, you're not surprised by it. You don't mistake it for an emergency. Conflict becomes familiar ground, not because you enjoy it, but because you've practiced meeting it without losing yourself. The Stoics believed the measure of a person wasn't how little conflict they faced, but how little of themselves they surrendered when it arrived. You don't need to provoke challenges to grow. Life provides plenty. The argument, the delay, the unfair moment. Each one is a training session, not to make you harder, but to make you steadier. And when you start seeing conflict this way, something shifts. You stop asking, "How do I win this?" and start asking, "How do I leave this with my character intact?" That question changes everything. Because the man who treats conflict as practice is no longer fighting the world. He's refining himself quietly, consistently, and that kind of strength doesn't fade. After enough practice, something changes. Not all at once, not in a way you can point to and explain. It shows up quietly. You notice it in the evening when the house finally settles. The lights are low. The phone is on the table untouched. Your body feels different, looser, heavier in a good way. like it finally knows it can rest. The same kinds of things still happen during the day. People interrupt, plans shift, words land wrong, but they don't follow you home the way they used to. You sit down for dinner, and you're actually there, not replaying, not bracing for the next round, just present. That's the quiet result. It's not that you stopped caring. You care more selectively now. Your energy isn't scattered across every irritation. It stays closer to you, where you can use it. You sleep deeper, not because life got easier, but because your mind stopped working overtime trying to fix what was already over. The Stoics believed peace was the natural outcome of living in alignment with what you control and releasing what you don't. Not bliss, not constant calm, just fewer unnecessary battles. You feel it in your posture, the way your shoulders drop without effort, the way your breathing finds its rhythm faster after stress. People around you notice something too, even if they can't name it. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't escalate tension. You don't carry the room's anxiety on your back. That kind of presence changes the tone of interactions. Not because you're trying to influence anyone, but because steadiness is contagious. When something does need to be addressed, you address it cleanly, without edge, without lingering resentment. You say what needs to be said, then you let it go. That's another quiet result. You're no longer rehearsing conversations that haven't happened. You're no longer arguing in your head with people who aren't even there. Your attention comes back to where your feet are, to the work in front of you, to the people you care about. The Stoics didn't promise that the world would become fair. They promised something more realistic, that you wouldn't need the world to be fair in order to stay whole. That's what this practice gives you. Not invulnerability, integrity. You still feel irritation when it makes sense to feel it. You still set boundaries when they matter. You still stand up for yourself, but you don't bleed energy everywhere you go. You choose, and over time, those choices add up. You look back and realize you're carrying less weight than you used to. Old grievances don't rise as quickly. Small things don't demand as much attention. The fire hasn't disappeared. It's just contained now. It warms instead of burns. This is the result the Stoics cared about most. Not being admired, not being feared, being free. Free to move through your days without dragging yesterday behind you. Free to respond instead of react. Free to rest when it's time to rest. It doesn't announce itself. There's no moment where you say, "I've arrived." It simply becomes your way of living. And once you taste that kind of quiet, you understand why the Stoics chose it. Not as an escape from life, but as a way to finally be at home in it And this is where everything comes together. Not as a rule to memorize, not as a promise that life will stop testing you, but as a way of meeting those tests without losing yourself in the process. You've seen how the fire begins quietly, how it protects an image more than your character, how a single pause can change the direction of a moment, how calm, when trained, becomes something you can rely on, how letting go doesn't erase you, but lightens the load, how conflict, when approached with intention, becomes practice instead of damage. All of it points to one simple truth. You are not here to control the world. You are here to govern yourself within it. The Stoics didn't chase a life without friction. They prepared for a life with it. They understood that peace isn't the absence of pressure. It's the presence of choice. Choice in how you interpret what happens. Choice in how long you carry it. Choice in whether you hand your energy over or keep it anchored in your values. This isn't about becoming distant or detached. It's about becoming grounded. When you live this way, you don't harden, you clarify. You stop reacting to every spark and start responding from what actually matters to you. Character, dignity, fairness, restraint. These aren't abstract ideas. They show up in small, ordinary moments. In the way you speak when you're tired. In the way you listen when you feel challenged. In the way you walk away without dragging the moment behind you. That's where Stoicism lives. Not in quotes, not in labels, in practice. And here's the part worth remembering. You don't have to master all of this at once. You don't need perfect discipline. You don't need to get it right every time. You just need to notice. Notice when the fire starts. Notice the pause when it appears. Notice what you're about to protect. Then choose even once to respond in a way that keeps your character intact. That single choice matters more than you think, because it's not isolated. It becomes a reference point. The next time the moment comes, you'll recognize it faster. The pause will feel more familiar. The grip will loosen sooner. That's how change actually happens. Quietly, incrementally. So as you move back into your day, don't look for a test. It will find you on its own. When it does, remember this. You don't need to react to prove your strength. You don't need to carry what isn't yours. You don't need to win every moment. You only need to leave it whole. If something here stayed with you, sit with it for a minute after this ends. Notice where it applies. Notice where it might help. And if you're willing, bring that awareness into the next moment that asks something of you. That's enough. This path doesn't require perfection. It rewards consistency. May you move through what comes next steady, clear, and unburdened. And may the quiet strength you're building continue to show up exactly when you need it.